Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Resonate. This lovely sunny day. A little bit windy. Hope you're not going to get too much wind interference today. I've got a fantastic friend who's agreed to chat with me today. And Shunu Chowdhury, when I first met Shunu many years ago, she was speaking at the front because she's involved in church leadership. And I thought, there's somebody I want to listen to. She's a deep thinker, as you'll pick up in a minute, and articulates things in a way that really resonates for me. And so Shunu is a maths teacher. Is that right, Shunu?
Yes, I'm a maths teacher.
She's a maths teacher. She's involved in community serving through the food banks and through her church locally. So Shunu, it's really great to see you. It's great to have you here. But what's resonating for you? Tell me what's been on your heart during this period.
Well, when I was thinking about this, Phil, I reflected back on the fact that at the beginning of lockdown, a friend of mine asked me if I would write a couple of sentences about some big questions I had. And as I was thinking about my big questions, I thought of three areas where I feel that I have some broken bridges. And I'll explain what I mean by, I'll go through the three questions that I feel need some repair. And the first one is that I've never, ever been able to engage with history. History as a topic, history as a place of curiosity where you get other perspectives. I intellectually know why people study history, but I have always looked at people who enjoy history with a huge amount of envy, really.
Yeah.
It's something to do with my relationship to the past, or how I see the past, because I can see that if you give me a nice philosophy book, I love it, or psychology or sociology.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I could spend hours on that.
Yeah.
But history.
I know what you mean. It's a challenging thing, isn't it, to connect sometimes. I mean, I guess traveling certain places helps you because you see certain of the. I used to do a fair bit of traveling with my dad, and we used to visit old places and old ruins and things. And I think my imagination, plus the stories I used to read about ancient Rome and places like that, would get my imagination going. So I'd sometimes put myself into that situation. But I guess that's just my crazy imagination. But history didn't really do it for me at school.
I don't have much of an imagination, to be honest, Phil. That might be the problem. Whereas, my husband, he loves history, and there's a bit of me that I can give you a rational reason, maybe. I'm a third culture kid. I have lived, that means I lived for a period outside of my parents' passport culture, so the Tudors didn't mean much to me. All of those things are there, but I know people of all sorts of cultures love history, so I can't really understand why I've struggled with history. So that was my first one, where I felt I needed to repair a bridge. The second one, which I think is fairly common to a lot of people, is the spiritual and material divide. And that's not because I'm afraid of rationality, because I'm a maths teacher. I like mathematical modelling. But somewhere deep inside me, there's a disconnect, because I know that I'm someone who would like to see God heal supernaturally, see more of that. But I equally want a respirator if I need it.
Absolutely.
So there is some sort of dissonance inside me, which I'm aware of. And I don't know if you probably heard the news last week. Francis Collins won the Templeton Prize, who's the director. Well, the Templeton Prize is given to someone who works to bridge the gap between religion and science. So I know that there are these amazing scientists out there who don't experience, presumably, this disconnect, but I do. And I think probably me and a few other people out there may resonate with that disconnect. And, you know, Phil, you and I know, you know, we have been brought up in pretty good kingdom theology. So the direction of travel is your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. So you know, it's not a theological issue, I don't feel, particularly. And the third area of broken bridges for me is the area of using scripture as a historical document, rather than using it as a jumping off point for my spiritual life.
Yes.
And
no, that's the common ground for a lot of people who come from charismatic churches, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with people using it in that way, but I just think it's also
it's not the only way. Yeah,
it's not the only way.
Absolutely not.
And you know, for myself, I was brought up nominally as a Christian because my mother's family are Orthodox Christians from the South. But like yourselves, in the 70s, we and you know my contemporaries experienced this spiritual awakening to God in Jesus Christ through the power of the Holy Spirit, and our personal experience was very strong. And what I particularly have been aware of is that, you know, I studied theology in the early 80s as an undergraduate, and it was full of bias and agenda, and there seemed to be quite a strong push at tearing down faith. And so in order to protect my spiritual life, which was so precious.
That's bizarre for some of our listeners, though, isn't it? That you should go to theological college and the bias should be towards tearing down faith.
But then, you see, what has happened, you know, studying theology in the early 80s, you didn't have NT Wright, you didn't have John Walton on the agenda, you didn't have Chris Wright and Stanley Hauerwas. These were not the books that we were reading. It was Boltman, Bart, etc., etc. But the damage of that is that it enhanced that view of using scripture as a jumping off point in order to survive, in order to preserve my personal relationship with God, which was so precious to me.
Yeah.
And so that further creates a disconnect between the historical Jesus and the journey of God revealing himself through history. And the reason why I think all of these three areas are a problem, primarily, and certainly the way I view them as a problem for me, is that they're like a tide that pulls you towards Platonism slightly, where you think you're looking for some ideals, towards allegorizing everything, you know, so everything is, you can create a story out of anything. But on a more probably detrimental way, I think it pulls you into introspection and subjectivity.
Absolutely. The subjectivity of experience, which is what people long for, because it hasn't been affirmed in its right relationship with objective history, I guess, in so many areas.
Something's going on there. And so, and the problem with that too is that, you know, do you remember Roger used to use that ditty, you know, wonderful things in the Bible I see, some put
wonderful there,
some put there by me. You know, so that's very much how it is. There is no, but you can't have public debate about personal experience.
No, that's it. It's your story, and it's no question.
It's your story. There's no question. We're not pulled out of ourselves. These three broken bridges pull you into introspection. They pull you away from people. They pull you into personal experience. They, you know, we're actually, and that in itself isn't so healthy, I don't think. I'm not completely wrong, but not so healthy.
It's just not the big picture. That's the challenge, I guess, that you're pointing out, is it? Yes,
I think so, but possibly it has some more negative impacts, because I think that probably I'll go on to what I think about that, because I was going to share with you a story of an experience I had. I'm thinking about how has God God has been repairing some of these broken bridges. And I've been thinking about how God has been reflecting on how I think what has he done? How has he done this for me? And one of the situations is that I was invited to go to a seminar, which was it was hosted by a psychoanalyst and an art historian.
Ooh, dangerous combination.
I know, it was an extraordinary event. And they were talking about one particular painting by an artist called Watteau. I had never heard of Watteau. He's an 18th century French artist. And I brought a picture of the picture they were talking about here for you, Phil.
Ooh.
Not a very good one. It's really, as you see, it's a bunch of people having a chat with each other in a picnic context.
That's very kind of a mixture of Corot and Botticelli.
I don't know, Phil. I know nothing about my art knowledge is nil, really. Well, what happened in this seminar was that the psychoanalyst first of all started talking about the painting, and she used it as a jumping off point. She talked about her response to it, how this had impacted her emotionally, psychologically. She expanded on it, and then she opened up the meeting, and it was a huge auditorium filled with people, to a time of free association. So basically, it went round the whole building with people just picking up on what someone said, associating it with their own experience, and it went round and round and round. I quite enjoyed it, because all these things are things I enjoyed, but the person I was with found it really scary. And yes, scary. Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? And what it reminded me of is that Reinhard Niebuhr, because I like my philosophy, Reinhard Niebuhr said, the thing that frightens us about ourselves is not that we are finite, i.e. that we're matter and we die, but that we are infinite, dangerously so. Our minds can travel anywhere. We can go into ourselves, we can go into the future and into the past. We have this capacity for infinity almost in our souls.
It is extraordinary, isn't it?
It's extraordinary. And in a sense, what the person who said it was scary was saying is, what we have experienced is an unbounded exercise. You can go anywhere.
Yeah.
Which at one level is a microcosm of a postmodern culture. Follow your heart, be anything you want. You don't need any boundaries. So scary was an appropriate comment. So, I quite like scary in that way, because it plays into this tide that pulls me into the inner world.
Yeah.
But then it cut to the art historian. It didn't cut. The art historian started talking.
Yeah.
And he was extremely matter of fact. He talked about the cultural context. He talked about the painter. He talked about the influences at the time. And then he said something. He said he talked about, at the time, the Enlightenment values were that of valuing highly conversation, intelligent and engaging conversation. At that moment, I experienced this extraordinary connection with history, because I thought...
That's what I can connect to. That's amazing. Yes. Carry on, sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No, it's all right. It's this art historian was I would say he was someone who was fairly, no one can be agenda and bias free, but I thought he was reasonably free of agenda and bias. He was just saying things the way they are. But it suddenly set up questions in my head. How did me how did I, as an Indian person, have the same experience as these people in, 18th century France?
Yeah.
How did that philosophy travel to India in the 19th century? I understand this. I used to make my children sit at the dinner table with adults to make intelligent conversation. It was so real. But the thing that I thought when I was listening to him, at least as I've reflected on it, is that here was a man who was telling me the truth without bias, with no agenda, and somehow God could embody truthfulness. And what I experienced was the words that you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free, because that connection suddenly created a certain area of freedom from a part of my life which I would now view as slightly idolatrous. It mattered too much.
How interesting. I think that's it. Well, what I'm hearing you say, Shunu, tell me if I'm wrong, is that there have been areas of life where it's almost had the label, there be dragons, you can't go there. Is that, or at least they're not.
I haven't known how to go there.
Yeah.
Because some of the truth telling of history is something that people are now just starting to engage with, aren't they?
In a new way, definitely.
In a new way.
Hear that. Yeah.
And in the truth telling, God inhabits it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, I do recall fairly early on, somebody teaching me all truth is God's truth, which I held on to very, very strongly. That it's not like, it's a bit like the news. There's always a mixture going on, whatever channel you log on to. And some people are doing it with integrity and some people aren't.
I think so.
But the reality is that when you catch truth combined with integrity, then something freeing takes place. And that phrase, the truth shall set you free, is absolutely right.
I don't think this art historian was someone who, I have no idea about him. He may not have had any, he may not have classed himself as religious in any way, but I think he was a truth teller.
Yeah.
And I think God inhabits the truth, and
Wonderful.
He can use truth.
He does.
So that was, and suddenly, of course, we can unravel this for a lot longer, but the nature of history, which we won't hear. But the point I felt was that God repaired a bit of a bridge in my relationship to history.
Brilliant. Then, so you're going to be going to lots of museums?
No, I don't think so.
No. Oh, right. Okay.
But then there was the other bridges, particularly that between the spiritual and the material. Now this has been definitely a COVID experience. How has God helped me to been helping to repair those bridges? And it's come because I've had the time and I've sat down and I've listened to NT Wright's lectures on Discerning the Dawn. They're the Gifford lectures. There's a set of 7 lectures.
What's they called?
It's called Discerning the Dawn.
Discerning the Dawn. Okay.
Yeah, it's the Gifford lectures, and he's written it into a book called History and Eschatology. I haven't read the book, but again, this is not an intellectual proposition I'm talking about, because my divide in terms of the material and the spiritual, I'm aware is I can see that because of it, again, I find myself being pulled into a sort of deism, the watchmaker who sets the planet in motion and steps back, or a sort of Platonism or Gnosticism. And I was very struck that the Jesuits in the 16th century viewed science as their tool for taking Jesus to China. And I think to myself, how far I am from seeing that perspective, which means there is something there that disconnects. But what NT Wright said, and again, I think this is when someone, from as far as again, this is a personal experience. He talked about Epicureanism, and he talked about it with quite a lot of emphasis as being the root cause of the material spiritual divide. And Epicureanism is 307 BC. Apostle Paul would have known this philosophy.
Absolutely, it was around in the days of the apostles. Yeah.
But as I listened to NT Wright, I thought he was trying to emphasize this point. But when I heard it, I didn't suddenly understand it intellectually. I experienced it spiritually, as like a divide went, and something came back together. And the reason why I think
that's a real kairos moment, isn't it?
Well, yes, but it's not an intellectual moment primarily.
Well, I don't think kairos moments are intellectual. I think they are far greater than an intellectual moment. Well, the way I would summarize an kairos moment is that aha, it's a eureka moment. It's not just intellectual; it's spiritual. It's an awakening. Yeah.
But Phil, for me, it was something I felt that suddenly clicked. Not into my thinking, but and the way I can only explain it is that what happens is that this disconnect shows itself particularly like when you're praying for something.
Yes.
Because you close your eyes and the doubts come flooding in. So the disconnect suddenly gets silenced. It feels like it's suddenly silenced, that I can see the world differently.
Yes.
And I think it came out of the fact that NT Wright said something that was the true cause. He said, it's not the Enlightenment. That is not the place where this disconnect started. This disconnect started with Epicureanism. Possibly that was a point of profound truth. Again.
Yes.
That for me, God inhabited.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Certainly, I think the nearest thing that gets to that is when people of integrity and complete vulnerability speak truth, and speak truth that carries the weight of history, mythology, psychology, and every other science.
Absolutely. So to wind this up, Phil, I was just trying to think, why do I think this is important in a post-corona world? And I think the reason I think this is so important in a post-corona world is that to invite people to engage in a public space, I think people need to regain confidence in people in positions of power, because we live in a world of fake news. We have lost confidence that we're not being manipulated, that there aren't hidden agendas and biases, which includes hidden agendas and biases by science, which purports to be value-free, which isn't completely true.
Nothing is value-free. Yeah.
Nothing is value-free, but no one makes explicit their agenda and their biases, because if you don't, you can manipulate people. Yes. And I think that the post-corona world is forcing people probably more into their private space, and we need to be drawn into the public space, which means that we need to have people who are not expert dissemblers. We need to be have truth speakers in every area of life. Absolutely. In the public space, and that is people who have the spiritual discipline of integrity in their inner parts. Otherwise, we will all atomize even more, which I think leaves us all deeply vulnerable.
Yes. It's a deeply vulnerable moment, isn't it, in history? And it feels like the earthquake's shaken everything down, but people will either scramble to rebuild it as it was, or they'll take this moment to deeply reflect and to ask these questions. What is it that I'm going to rebuild for this half of my life, for this next half, or however long we have? And I think that's such a helpful exposition of your own journey there, Shunu. It's really very helpful and so deep. I did warn people that it was going to get deep with you, so I don't know how on earth, if at all, I'm going to even bother trying to edit this down, but I'll probably just leave it as it is and tell people ahead of time, you're going to have to stick your thinking caps on a little bit for this. So thank you, Shunu. God bless you.
You too. Lovely to talk to you, Phil.
It's great to speak to you, Shunu. God bless. Love to sign.
Bye-bye.